All right, so let's dive right into these Ukraine peace talks. It's like someone just hit fast forward on this whole thing.
Yeah, it really does feel that way.
1 minute, we're all bracing ourselves for this long, drawn-out conflict, and the next thing you know, President Trump is stepping in, saying he's going to broker a deal.
And going solo.
And going solo.
It's surprise.
I mean, we've got news articles practically piling up, experts are buzzing, and the timeline is shifting like every single hour.
Yeah, and it's not just the speed of it all that's got people talking.
Right.
It's this decision to just leave European leaders out of these initial talks with Putin.
Right.
It's raising eyebrows, let's just say that.
Definitely. So, okay, let's unpack this a little bit. I mean, we all know Trump's known for, kind of shaking things up.
Right.
But what's the strategy here? What's he trying to achieve by sidelining Europe?
Well, you've got some analysts like Rebekah Koffler. She's arguing that this is all very deliberate, a power move.
Okay.
She actually believes that European involvement could hurt the whole peace process at this point.
Okay, so that's a bold statement.
It is.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, she points to, the divisions within NATO.
Right.
About Ukraine potentially joining.
Right, yeah.
And she says, look, that's a really contentious issue.
It is.
And if you bring all those different opinions to the table, now it's just going to create roadblocks with Putin.
Right.
I mean, he is dead set against Ukraine joining NATO.
Absolutely. So essentially the argument is that you need a united front.
Yeah.
For these talks to actually have a chance.
Right now is not the time for internal squabbles.
And that means leaving Europe out, at least for the time being.
Exactly, at least for now. Plus, Koffler argues that, look, Putin holds a lot of the cards here. You can't deny the reality of the situation.
Right.
Russia's military position gives him a lot of leverage.
Right.
And European leaders might not have the kind of pull they need to really influence him directly.
So it's kind of like cut out the middleman, go straight to the source of the issue.
It seems that way, and it fits with how Trump has operated on the world stage before.
Yeah.
Remember how he approached North Korea? He tends to go for these direct negotiations with leaders. He likes to deal with who he perceives as strong men.
It's interesting. I mean, so how's all of this playing out with European leaders? I can't imagine they're thrilled about being left out of something this important.
No, they are not.
Yeah.
Macron called an emergency summit.
Oh, wow.
He's got all these other European leaders involved, Schultz, Sanchez, Starmer. They're all scrambling to try and make sure Europe has some kind of a seat at this table.
Right. And this has got to be especially unnerving for leaders in places like Poland or the Baltic states.
Oh, absolutely.
They're right on the front lines geographically.
Right there.
Their security is directly tied to whatever comes out of these talks.
Absolutely. And you can hear that sense of urgency when they're making their statements.
Oh, yeah.
Emphasizing that Europe has to be part of shaping the future of their own continent. It's not just about, security guarantees either.
Right.
They want to say in what potential economic and humanitarian assistance looks like for Ukraine.
Right. Now, Starmer from the UK, he's made a statement about potentially sending British troops to Ukraine,
Yeah.
As part of a peacekeeping force if a lasting peace agreement does come out of all of this.
Right.
But he also made a point of saying that they need a U.S. backstop.
That's a crucial detail. That U.S. backstop essentially means a guarantee of U.S. support if things were to go south.
Right.
And I think it highlights the kind of balancing act the U.K. is doing after Brexit.
Yeah.
They're trying to stay close to the U.S., but also navigate their relationship with the EU.
Yeah, it's a really complicated situation.
It is.
So this whole thing is really, I think, exposed all the complexities of the transatlantic relationship.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely put a spotlight on that and on the incredibly high stakes involved.
Right.
These decisions could have a ripple effect on global security for years to come.
Yeah, and then in the middle of all of this, you've got Zelensky.
Right.
I mean, he's the man at the center of this whole storm.
He is
Facing this immense pressure to negotiate, but also trying to maintain some leverage.
It's a difficult position to be in.
It is. He's got to be feeling the heat right now.
He canceled his trip to Saudi Arabia, remember?
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Where Trump's supposed to be meeting with Putin.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty clear signal that he doesn't want to be sidelined.
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty bold move. Do you think it was a sign of strength or a sign of weakness?
I think it was a bit of both.
Yeah.
It shows that he's determined to assert Ukraine's agency in all of this.
Right.
But at the same time, it reflects the reality of his limited options.
Yeah.
He is trying to negotiate from a weakened position.
Right.
He's got to do what he can to make his voice heard.
Absolutely. And he's basically drawn a line in the sand. He said outright that he won't accept any agreement that's made without Ukraine's involvement.
Yeah.
So the question is, how much influence can he actually have?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
And it leads us to the heart of the matter here.
Yeah.
What is actually on the table in these negotiations?
Right.
What could a peace deal look like, and at what cost?
Yeah, let's get into that. So what are we hearing? What are the experts saying? What kind of concessions are even being discussed?
Well, some analysts are suggesting that Trump might be open to offering Putin some pretty significant concessions,
Like what?
like allowing Russia to keep Crimea,
Whoa, okay.
which they annexed back in 2014,
Yeah.
and maybe even parts of eastern Ukraine,
Wow.
where the conflict has been the most intense.
That's a huge concession.
It is.
That's a lot of territory.
It is.
And I can only imagine that's not going to sit well with a lot of people,
But
especially in Europe.
especially in Europe, and this is where the fact that Europe's not involved in these initial talks
Right.
becomes even more concerning. Many European leaders, and especially the ones in countries bordering Russia,
Mhm.
they're understandably anxious
Yeah.
about what a deal like that could mean.
Right. So, okay, let me just recap here.
Yeah.
You've got Trump potentially pushing for a quick resolution, even if it means making some pretty big concessions.
Yeah.
You've got Zelensky trying to hold on to as much territory and autonomy as he can.
Right.
And then you've got the EU scrambling, trying to make their voices heard and protect their interests.
It's a complicated situation.
It's a mess.
A lot of moving parts, and it's really not clear what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear, the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. So we've got a lot to unpack here, and it's clear that the future of Ukraine and perhaps even Europe is hanging in the balance. We're going to take a quick pause just to gather our thoughts, but we'll be right back to delve a little deeper into those potential scenarios and what they might mean for you.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back. And we left off talking about those potential concessions Trump might offer Putin. Like letting Russia keep Crimea is already pretty controversial, but there are these whispers that there's even more on the table. What's all this talk about Ukraine and NATO?
Yeah, that's right. The rumors are really flying about a potential agreement where Ukraine commits to not joining NATO,
Mm-hmm.
which, was a major trigger for the conflict to begin with.
Yeah.
It's something that Putin has been demanding for years.
He has.
And if Trump were to agree to it, it'd be seen as a huge concession.
Yeah, wow. That would really shake things up. And what about this talk of Russia keeping control of eastern Ukraine, too?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Russia already annexed Crimea back in 2014.
Right?
And now they're talking about them keeping the Donbas region, which is in eastern Ukraine,
Right.
where the fighting's been the most intense.
Right.
And those areas are strategically important to Russia. I mean, they give access to the Black Sea,
Right.
and they've got important industrial resources.
So, okay, let's say hypothetically these concessions do end up being part of a peace deal. What are we talking about in terms of ripple effects? What would it mean for the U.S., for Europe, and for the world?
Well, for the U.S., it could be seen as a way to kind of step back from this conflict.
Okay.
I mean, it's costly. It's been dragging on.
Yeah.
And, Trump has been critical of the U.S. getting involved in these foreign entanglements. So this
Yeah.
could be framed as, fulfilling his America First agenda.
Okay, but wouldn't that also raise concerns about the U.S.'s commitment to its allies?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're seen as willing to abandon Ukraine, what kind of message does that send?
Right. What does that say to other countries facing pressure from Russia or other adversaries?
Exactly. And it's something that a lot of European leaders are already voicing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already on edge about Trump going solo with these negotiations.
Yeah.
And a deal that looks like it's appeasing Putin
Mm-hmm.
could really laugh the transatlantic relationship.
Yeah.
It raises the question, can the U.S. be trusted as a reliable security partner in the long run?
Right. And we can't forget about the impact on Ukraine itself. I mean, giving up Crimea and parts of the Donbas, that's a huge blow,
Oh, absolutely.
both symbolically and territorially.
Huge. And we can't ignore the human cost of all of this.
Of course not.
Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced.
Yeah.
Their lives have been completely upended.
Yeah.
And these potential concessions raise all these questions about what happens to them.
Right.
Will they be able to go back home?
Right.
What kind of future are they even facing?
Those are really important questions. So let's say, for argument's sake, this peace deal actually does happen. These concessions are made. What kind of safeguards would be put in place? What kind of guarantees to prevent Russia from just doing this again?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Some have suggested, a kind of Marshall Plan for Ukraine
Okay.
with a ton of economic aid to help them rebuild.
Right. The original Marshall Plan, that was the U.S. initiative to rebuild Europe after World War II.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it was a huge success. It helped stabilize Europe and prevented the spread of communism.
Exactly. So the idea is that a similar program could help Ukraine recover, economically integrate more with the West,
Okay.
and make it less vulnerable to Russian pressure.
But who's going to pay for that? I mean, would the U.S. foot the bill? And what about European countries?
Right.
Would they be willing to fund something so massive, especially if they feel like they're being asked to clean up a mess that they didn't create.
It's true. The financial side of this is really complex.
Yeah.
You know, the U.S. might pitch in, but they're also going to likely pressure European countries to share the burden.
Right.
And that could easily cause more tension within the EU.
Yeah.
Especially given the issues they've already got, you know, over defense spending and burden sharing.
Absolutely. And what about military guarantees?
Yeah.
Would NATO step in and actually defend Ukraine if Russia attacks again?
That's a tough one. I mean, NATO membership for Ukraine seems like it's off the table at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to imagine the U.S. or NATO wanting to risk a direct military confrontation with Russia.
Right. Especially after all this back and forth over NATO expansion.
Exactly. So if there's no clear military guarantee, how effective can a peace deal even be?
Right. Wouldn't Putin just feel emboldened to try this again down the road?
It's definitely a risk. Some experts think that making these major concessions to Russia is just going to reward aggression
Right.
and encourage Putin to pull something similar in the future,
Right.
maybe with other countries in the region.
Yeah, this all feels incredibly fragile.
It is.
This balance of power, this web of alliances, the future of Ukraine just hanging in the balance.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like one wrong move could set off this whole chain reaction
Right.
with unpredictable consequences.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it really highlights how important Zelensky's role in this is.
It does.
I mean, he's walking this tightrope,
He is.
trying to get the best outcome for Ukraine,
Right.
while also dealing with the competing interests of these global powers.
Right. So on the one hand, he needs international support,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, he doesn't want to be a pawn in this geopolitical game.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure.
It is. And his decisions over the next few days, I mean, they could really impact not only the immediate future of Ukraine,
Yeah,
but the country's long-term trajectory as a nation.
absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're only scratching the surface of this situation.
We are.
The stakes are incredibly high.
And we need to remember that underneath all of this, you know, the high-level diplomacy, the geopolitical maneuvering,
Mm-hmm.
there are real people whose lives are being shattered by this conflict.
Right. The human cost of war.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the fundamental question here.
What's that?
What kind of peace are we actually talking about?
Yeah.
Is it just about stopping the fighting,
Okay.
or is it about something more,
Right.
something deeper,
Yeah.
a real process of reconciliation and rebuilding?
Those are really good questions to think about as we head into the final part of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick moment to gather our thoughts.
Okay.
But when we come back, we'll try to make sense of all of this and offer some key takeaways. Okay, we're back. And I got to say, after going through all those potential concessions and the ripple effects of this peace deal, my head is spinning.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It really is. It just highlights how, even though this is happening thousands of miles away for a lot of our listeners,
Right.
the implications of these talks, they're global.
They are. It's tempting to think, oh, that's over there. It's got nothing to do with me.
Right.
But international relations, they're a tangled web.
They are.
You tug on one thread, the whole thing shakes.
Exactly. And just look at the economics of it all. I mean, a long conflict in Ukraine that's going to disrupt supply chains,
Oh, yeah.
energy markets.
Absolutely.
It could even trigger a global recession.
It could. And we can't forget the humanitarian crisis
Of
either.
course not.
Millions of Ukrainians' displaced resources are stretched thin. The impact is going to be felt far beyond Ukraine's borders.
So even if we don't see, tanks rolling down Main Street here,
Right.
the decisions made in these negotiations are going to shape the world we live in,
Mm-hmm.
the economy we participate in,
Absolutely.
the kind of future we're heading towards.
It's a wake-up call for all of us. It reminds us that peace is fragile.
Mm-hmm.
The stability we take for granted can change in an instant.
It can.
And it's a call to action. It's a call to stay informed, to think critically, to really engage in these discussions about the role we want our own countries to play on the world stage.
Well said. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've focused a lot on the concessions, the guarantees,
Right.
the power plays.
The strategy.
But what about the human element?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would it even take for Ukraine and Russia to move past this animosity,
Right.
to rebuild trust after all the bloodshed and the trauma?
That's a question that goes way beyond these negotiations,
Yeah.
but it's an important one.
Yeah,
True peace isn't just about stopping the fighting.
right.
It's about addressing the root causes of the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's about healing the wounds of the past.
Right.
Finding a way to coexist
Yeah.
peacefully.
And that's going to take courage,
Oh, yeah.
empathy, a real commitment to dialogue,
Absolutely.
and not just from leaders,
Mhm.
from everyday citizens on both sides.
It's a long road.
It is.
But it's the only path to a lasting peace.
Powerful words to end on. So as we close out this deep dive into the 2025 Ukraine negotiations, we hope you've gained a better understanding of the issues at play, the stakes involved, and the human stories at the heart of this event.
Yeah.
Remember, staying informed is the first step towards making a difference. So until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world around you.